Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to the James Madison Institute's 2014 annual dinner. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We're glad you're here and we're able to be with us. It's going to be a celebration and an enjoyment of all of the great things that are happening both in the state amongst all of these various folks. I'm Bob McClure, President and CEO of the James Madison Institute. JMI is one of Florida's oldest and largest think tanks, founded in 1987 by J. Stanley Marshall, former president of Florida State University. You'll hear more about the Institute as we go through the evening, but before we begin, I would like to thank a few people for their generous support. First, our generous sponsors who believe in our mission, who share our beliefs and have committed their time and their treasure to the advancement of freedom. I'd like to first thank our dinner sponsors, Rob Goodell, the Goodell Family Foundation, and Michael Durden from the Durden Foundation. And none of this gets done without having a superb staff. I was reading an article in Fortune magazine the other day from one of the great generals who's a four-star general currently working in Afghanistan, and they asked him, what are the rules of leadership? And he said there are 3 rules of leadership. He said the first one is surround yourself with really good people, and I can't remember rules 2 and 3. And I'm fortunate enough to surround myself with really good people, because even, I guess, a blind hog finds a nut every once in a while, and I am fortunate to have great folks, and I need to recognize them now. My Executive Vice President is Becky Liner. Vice President for Advancement is Francisco Gonzalez. Our Vice President for Communications is Valerie Wickbolt. Our Policy Director is Bob Sanchez. Alyssa Gill is our Director of Events and Logistics, and she's the one who is responsible for every detail tonight. So please join me in thanking Alyssa for her hard work. Bill Maddox, our Resident Fellow. Tanya Clendenin, who's my executive assistant and helps keep me straight. Scott Scholl from the Florida Verve, and Jill Maddox is our Foundation's Grant Development Manager. And Michael Werner, Kristen Hill, and Tori Walker, who are all involved in both development and communications. Please join me in thanking my staff for their efforts. I also want to recognize a number of elected officials. Some have been held up for various reasons, but many of them are here. I'd like to call them all by name, and then at the end we'd like to thank them for their service as well. We have Lori Hutto, who is with U.S. Congressman Steve Sutherland's office. We have Senator Michael Baleka, Senator Matt Caldwell, Senator John Legg, Senator Garrett Richter, Senator David Simmons, Senator Kelly Stargell, Representative Dennis Baxley, Representative Halsey Bashirs, Representative Neil Cumby, Representative Debbie Mayfield, Representative Larry Metz, Representative Keith Perry, Representative John Wood, Representative Dana Young, and former Representative Rachel Burgin. Please join me in thanking them for all of their efforts today. And of course, you'll be seeing Senate President Don Gaetz and Speaker Weatherford, who will be here in just a few minutes. Last group I want to introduce before we actually begin the official component of the program is my board of directors, which is just, I can't tell you enough about what a fine group of folks these people are. Not only are they committed to the cause of freedom, to free markets and limited government and personal responsibility, to the belief in the founding principles of this great country, but they are folks of tremendous personal accomplishment, both in the working world, but also with their families. And they don't do this for any other reason than they believe in the state of Florida and they believe in this country. And I can't thank them enough personally for all that they do. And I'd like to call them by name, and I will call them all, and we can give them all a round of applause at the end. First, our board chairman, who's back in the saddle, former Speaker of the House, Alan Bentz. From Naples, Glenn Blau. From Jacksonville, we have J.F. Bryan. Several of these weren't able to make it tonight. From Miami, we have Ambassador Charles E. Chuck Cobb. From Pensacola, CEO of Gulf Power, Stan Conley. From Jacksonville also, we have George Gibbs. From Orlando, we have Rob Goodell. From Lakeland, we have John Robusha. From Tampa, we have John Kirtley. From Orlando, we have Fred Linhart. Also from Orlando, but who couldn't be with us tonight, Tom Sidema. And from Tallahassee, right here in the hometown, great board member, Jeff Swain. There are two gentlemen I need to recognize who couldn't be with us here tonight, but I would be remiss without briefly mentioning them. Both of them, I guess, collectively hired me about 10 years ago. One was my board chairman for about 5 years, and he has had some health issues, but he's doing much better. He's living over in Panama City with his wife, Leela, and that is our chairman emeritus, Charles Hilton. And then, of course, our founder, who is 91 years young, but is dealing with a bout of pneumonia currently, living out at Westminster, so he and Shirley weren't able to be with us tonight, and that would be also our chairman emeritus, J. Stanley Marshall. And now we will begin the program. I want to share with you a couple of things, and then I'm going to allow you to begin your meal. No doubt most all of you have heard the motto, live free or die. That's where the theme of tonight's dinner comes from. And it's also the state motto, as you well know, the state of New Hampshire. But what you may not know is that in 2010, the state of New Hampshire unfortunately lost its stronghold on the title of being the freest state in the Union. As their 2009 and 2010 legislature hiked numerous taxes and fees and used stimulus dollars and new debt to fund a significant increase in government spending. Although New Hampshire still ranks very, very high on factors that matter, one thing we do know is that data collection matters. And the gentlemen you're going to hear from tonight, Travis Brown and Steve Moore, will wow you with their data collection and what is happening in the states. But that state has also, that is the state of New Hampshire, has lost roughly $1.1 billion in adjusted gross income for those tax increases in 2009 and 2010. And in a state like New Hampshire, they can't afford to see that money walk. People are moving, and they continue to move. And we've seen that happen in the state of New Hampshire. As I said, our theme for tonight is live free or move to Florida. That's what Floridians are doing by crossing the state line and coming here. That's what we're seeing happening across the country. From John Stossel to Forbes magazine, to the Wall Street Journal, to Fortune magazine, to numerous blogs across the internet, we're seeing that phrase and that theme continue to develop all across the country. And it's the great unstated conversation that we're not seeing out of Washington. Americans are choosing to do that. We'll be hearing a lot more about that theme tonight from this great lineup of speakers. And then when the Senate President and the Speaker of the House get here, we're going to have some fun. We really will, talking about the Florida story. So I won't steal their thunder, but Florida, I will say, turns out well in the end. And we're very proud of that as the organization, as the James Madison Institute, and we would like to kind of say that perhaps we've had some role in that. And of course, everyone in this room, elected officials, our board, and all of you in this state have played some role in that. And I think given that Florida will soon be the third largest state in the union, given that our demographics represent the entire country, it is incumbent upon all of us here. We have a tremendous, outsized responsibility to advance the causes that we believe in when it comes to policy in the future of this state and this country. So enjoy your dinner, and we'll get started here in about 20 minutes. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, one more quick thing. If I could have your attention one brief second. You remember that great staff I was talking about, that I was mentioning? I was just reminded that we have left out the invocation and a couple of other things. And so really, I'm just a figurehead. These folks really run the organization. So I'd like to ask our Executive Vice President to come forward, Becky Liner.
Good evening. As Bob said, I'm Becky Liner. I'm actually Bob's boss, but don't tell him. No. We want to thank all of you for being here with us tonight. As many of you in this room are aware, JMI has a very vibrant civics education initiative. And as part of that initiative, we reach out to students around the state, and we talk to them about founding principles and the importance of being an engaged citizen. We have reached, in the last few years, as we've done this civics education initiative, through a variety of means, including a partnership with newspapers and education, we have reached literally hundreds of thousands of students around the state. One of those students is with us tonight. Marley Gaetz is a fifth grader from Killearn Lakes Elementary School here in Tallahassee. And Marley was a participant in one of our civics programs that we do. We have a Ben Franklin reenactor who's with us tonight, Lloyd Wheeler, and we also do programs on thrift education. And so we have a game show that we do called Are You Smarter Than a Franklin County Fifth Grader? And Marley participated in that game show. And she's going to lead us tonight in the invocation and the pledge. I wanted to tell you a little bit about Marley. Her favorite classes are science and math, and she's currently in a gifted math class. Her favorite activities include soccer, softball, reading, and she's in the Mini Mew Math Club. The trait she shares with her mother is a love of reading, and with her father, a love of math. And she has twin sisters, Mira and Maggie. So will you join me in welcoming Marley, and she's going to lead us in the pledge and the invocation.
Thank you, God, for all the blessings and opportunities that you have given us. Help us to appreciate each day and give us the strength and guidance we need to do our best to get through all our challenges, jobs, and problems. May you be with us all the time, and may God bless our dinner tonight and all those here. Amen.
All right.
if you'll please join us for the pledge. Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Marley. Will y'all join me in thanking Marley for being here with us? And now, please enjoy your dinner, and we'll be back with you in a few minutes. Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with the rest of our program. Our two great guest speakers are going to have to get out of town quickly. They're going to New York, so they are flying out right after they're finished presenting. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We welcome all the media members and other supporters all over the country who will now be joining us through the live streaming of this event, which did start a few minutes ago, just so that you all know. My name is Valerie Wickbolt. I'm the Vice President of Communications for the James Madison Institute. I'm greatly honored to be here to have the privilege of introducing our first round of speakers. But before I do, I want to set the scene for us this evening. Many states in our nation are having relationship problems. They're having relationship problems with wealth. Wealth comes in many shapes and sizes: property, a business, one's income, a home, a family farm. And yet some states have squeezed wealth so tightly that it has little left to give. If wealth could prepare a breakup speech, I think it might go something like this. I need to flourish and live free. Your promises don't measure up for me. So I'm packing up my bags, and in the words of Billy Joel, if that's moving up, then I'm moving out. I need a state that understands me, one who gives me a say, a choice, offers opportunity, and welcomes me with open arms. Well, as with any troubled relationship, there's always somebody left behind to carry the weight. In this case, it's the high tax burden left over because there are fewer people left in the state to help pay the bills. States didn't know what they had until they lost it. And now some may be wondering, why? What did I do? You know, that old thing. Many are too hard-headed probably to even notice what they lost. But regardless of their reaction, there is one thing that's for sure. If they don't change their ways, wealth isn't coming back. The two speakers I'm about to introduce have probably never been described by anyone as relationship counselors. But tonight they'll be providing us with counsel on the subject of wealth migration and why it matters. You'll find both of their bios in your program that we left in your seats. Presenting first will be Travis Brown, taking a more state-focused perspective. Travis Brown is the author of How Money Walks and a regular contributor to Fox and Friends as well as Forbes.com, and has appeared on various radio and television broadcasts such as Bloomberg News, Fox Business Network, CNBC, Newsmax.com, NPR, and C-SPAN. Publications including U.S. News and World Report, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and the Dallas Morning News have cited Brown's work when reporting on taxes and the economy. An issue advocate who has worked across 35 states throughout the past 20 years, Brown frequently advises governors, state think tanks, and national civic organizations with his data-driven strategies. His company, Pelopidas LLC, is based in both St. Louis, Missouri, and here in Naples, Florida. Brown holds undergraduate degrees in both agricultural economics and political science from the University of Missouri-Columbia, and an MBA from Washington University in St. Louis. Dedicated to giving back to his community, Brown sits on the board of directors for Wings of Hope and the St. Louis Science Center. And then next, after Travis presents, we'll have Steve Moore, who's going to be outlining the national angle. As many of you know, Steve Moore was a former editorial board member and current contributor at the Wall Street Journal. He is currently chief economist at the Heritage Foundation, where he works on budget, fiscal, and monetary policy and showcases states that get fiscal houses in order. Moore was also the founder and president of the Club for Growth and has authored a number of books, including the one you'll be hearing about tonight.
He has also served as senior economist on the Congressional Joint Economic Committee and as senior economics fellow at the Cato Institute, where he published dozens of studies on federal and state tax and budget policy. Moore graduated from the University of Illinois and holds a master's degree in economics from George Mason University. Travis and Steve co-authored the book they'll be discussing tonight, titled, it's a long title, so bear with me, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of States, How Taxes, Energy, and Worker Freedom Change Everything, otherwise known as Wealth of States. This book was co-authored by Dr. Art Laffer and Rex Sinquefield. And as you know, those books will be sold tonight, and they're going to be sold right outside these doors during the event and after if you're interested in purchasing one. I highly recommend it. I actually have breaking news that we just got a couple minutes ago that Wealth of States was just released, and it has the #1 spot on barnesandnoble.com already, and it's placed 79th out of 150 in all books on USA Today's bestsellers list. So let's congratulate them on that. In the words of Dr. Art Laffer in the foreword to How Money Walks, it's about time. It's about time we started having these conversations. Income is our most mobile of resources. These books show us what is happening across the nation. This is not a political argument, nor a philosophical stance, but a statement of fact. We're talking about a topic that impacts every single American, and these numbers don't lie. Anyone who cares deeply about growth and prosperity for all Americans should understand these concepts. The American dream is worth protecting, and armed with the information you're about to hear tonight, we are better able to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, the authors of Wealth of States.
Well, good evening. I think I've drawn the short straw to start today, and that enables Steve Moore to finish his steak and shrimp. It's a real pleasure for Steve and I to be back together, batting and building and getting the band back together on all the evidence of what makes states prosperous. You know, we feel more excited than Vladimir Putin at an annexation party. You're really wonderful to see that we can talk here in Tallahassee, as we've done some time ago with the Florida Chamber of Commerce, implementing what you have set out and been very consistent with, a six-pillar strategy of building and strengthening from where you've been and going ahead where you want to go in the future. So in my short time, I'm going to give you, for those people that are a little familiar with our work and How Money Walks, I'm not going to cover a lot of the same material, but rather showcase how that contributes to our next release. So, as was mentioned, we're very pleased that we've got a very strong distribution program in a number of these bestseller lists coming up, like BNN and like USA Today. We're also eager to show the registry in the New York Times bestseller list coming up within the next week or so. And this is remarkable considering that state tax reform and things of this nature don't often hit that kind of distribution. So hopefully many of you will have a chance to look through that and understand what we're so excited about. For those that have a copy of How Money Walks, you know that was designed to be a quick, modular, easy read, something very approachable. This is more akin to a Gideon's Bible, I would say, of evidence by the likes of Art Laffer and the rest of us. It's designed to be a return resource reference guide that will go through chapter and verse that will showcase that A, no state has ever taxed its way into prosperity, and B, the states that are winning are continuing to win more and bigger all the time, and the states that stand to lose in the past performance really have a lot of work to just not catch up, but just to stay even with their past environment. So we look not only at tax and revenue factors, we don't just look at tax migration factors, we're also looking at ultimately how receipts to your government get spent and transferred through systems like here in Tallahassee, and ultimately for the horsepower that we as taxpayers who own our governments contribute in the form of Tax Freedom Day. Does everybody remember that this week? Tax Freedom Day. Gets a little bit later every year, doesn't it? And so when we think about owners of our government, contributors to our system of democracy, it's important that we also demand that those provision of public services, essential government services, be thought of as efficient and effective in the classroom, on the road, in the bridge, and across social services. So we're scoring a number of things that I want to just touch on and tease you a little bit to encourage your own copy of Wealth Estates. So literally in the past, what some of you know about tax flight is, it won't surprise you that income and wealth goes to where it's most welcome. And we're talking about billions, in some cases trillions of dollars. In particular, in our last release, we're looking at $2 trillion of movement of adjusted gross income across and between the states, and that's a big number. In fact, it's a very hard number to understand. So what does $1 billion look like? If it was actually structured here, we're talking about 10 pallets and 10,000 pounds of money alone. So really quite staggering to think about what $1 billion might entail. And the reason that's important, as of this week, update to our first release of how Money Walks to look at this across the country, we now know that Florida is on path to eclipse over $100 billion of adjusted gross income from other states coming into the Sunshine State over the last 19, nearly 20 years. And that's quite remarkable, even if you're a Texan, as some have migrated here. And we know Texas is doing quite well in job growth and is our chief competition across the Sunshine State. But to accumulate in the past our records of $95.6 billion and now over $100 billion is really quite remarkable. And we think, just like JMI, and it's a pleasure to be here supporting their efforts to make sure that your efforts towards liberty are constantly vigilant in the Capitol and in your communities, because if we take these things for granted, even when you have a good thing going, a good forward momentum, we know they're always at jeopardy in the future. We think that just like you here tonight, committed to outreach and lifelong learning in these areas of policy and applied work, that governors need to know about this issue as well. So we've spent a good chunk of our time not just preaching to the choir here across Naples and Orlando and Miami and Jacksonville and Pensacola, but this was a picture taken from last night where you may recognize that fellow, Governor Scott Walker, has been doing much of the same. Chief executives of states in this economy, with all of its challenges ahead, forging ahead and continuing to improve worker freedoms, improve the delivery and efficiency of government. And yes, last week, if you hadn't heard, or I guess last month, been a couple weeks, he signed into law a $541 million tax cut on property and income for middle-class families, thanks to, are you ready, a huge surplus in the state of Wisconsin. Now, how many of you remember him in the news not too long ago, fighting for his political life, taking an incredible amount of ambition on at a time which would seem to be less than ideal? And he and other governors like him are doing that. So even in these economic times, we understand that they need backup, they need evidence, and free market think tanks and other organizations here tonight make sure that those efforts are timely and possible. So how about a round for James Madison Institute just for tonight's effort? Now we understand the good news here as well, that not only our chambers of commerce and the regions across Florida understand this, but Governor Scott understands this as well. And so this picture was taken not too long ago talking about other ways that we could make this kind of voice heard, that the economy is working in Florida, has been a part of a long-term path that relative to the rest of the country is quite substantial and has much going for it, not only because we are a low-tax state that does not tax personal income, not only because there's tourism and trade, the likes of which other states would only claim to envy, but because there's been a strong effort to get out of the way of many of you in entrepreneurship, in production and earnings, taking risk for that return. So that's a big part of what we've tried to honor and make possible and hopefully inspire in the future of others. Where's Marley at? Is Marley still here? Did she already check out? She's busy. Marley is who many of the, is an example of who many of these stories are ultimately for. The evidence of decisions that we're making today in the areas of taxation, debt, spending, and balanced budgets, and examples of prosperity paths in states are ultimately going to pay off for the likes of Marley. So we want to invite local debates like this, and that's part of why Steve and I were published today in Tallahassee Democrat to talk about how Florida gets it right, and part of the interest that we have in making sure that you feel as comfortable about your economic prosperity path as a Texan would feel comfortable talking about shooting a coyote down the street on a morning jog as governor. We laugh because who's from Texas? We have any Texas? When we get them out there, we got a few. It's really hard to get someone to leave Texas, but occasionally it does happen. And I know we have a few here that know in both environments. Texas has led the country for the fourth straight year in jobs, but Florida is not too far behind. But unfortunately, in some cases, I think Floridians are too bashful telling the story that needs to be told here for the unique assets that, dare we say, are even uniquely competitive against a state like Texas. So we mention interstate competition and talk about that across many different state comparisons in the wealth of states to celebrate what we can learn from the mistakes of the past and the victories of the future. So we don't mention it because we want to hold anyone down or put the plight on a Marylander moving to Florida like it's inevitable that they can't turn their state around. But to the contrary, we also know, as John Adams would say, facts are really stubborn things. And what we have now is a really deep battery of evidence. In our case, starting with tax flight migration, we'll showcase some numbers that show 134 million taxpayer returns year over year on average for 18 years. So boom and bust cycles, governors, red states, blue states, when you score it all up, it shows you some fascinating results. We also know that there's other kinds of flight taking place as a result of decisions that aren't made every day, but do happen. So corporations also, in addition to individuals, take notice. This is a picture from airplane, me leaving Governor Walker last night, and this is right over the skies of Chicago, 26,000 feet. And a remarkable city. Anyone from Chicago? We have to have a few of you. Yes, you got it. You know, no one here would want to be down on a city like Chicago, or for that matter, Los Angeles, or for that matter, New York. But the fact is there's something bleeding out of a lot of those areas across America, and there seems to be a lack of attention in those areas in addressing what it may be. When I look down at a city like this at sunset and you think about $29 billion leaving Cook County, Illinois, the lion's share of all the largesse of economic opportunity, corporate income, manufacturers, having been with Governor Walker just 20 minutes earlier and asking him how it's going, and he says, you know, we're getting 3,000 jobs up the border in Milwaukee. It just keeps getting better and better. I wish it wasn't true for Illinois, but there are states that get it and states that don't. I don't know if we'd qualify as a relationship counselor in states, but it is useful to benchmark these things over time. And it's not just true there in Chicago. There's a cultural connection to places like the Gulf Coast of Florida. This is a cookie leaving the groundbreaking ceremony of the Hertz announcement. Who's from Lee County? I know we have at least one representative from Lee County. A lot of cooperation in addition to the business climate going into these efforts. you can expect, regardless of where you're from in this state, to see more of these kinds of ribbon cuttings and announcements. And not just because of people looking at the traditional things that you may remember. You can expect a lot of corporate moves and big fish landing in this kind of area because of what is happening elsewhere in the country. How many Americans are part of this move? How many are represented? We mentioned $2 trillion. That's a big number. Hard to understand, but it's about the gross state product of California is $2 trillion. And we know that the bottom line, whether it's in the analysis of tax flight or in wealth estates, that behavior, our behavior in this case, really matters. Who remembers, maybe a few of you, former Governor Tim Pawlenty of Minnesota? Anyone? Okay. So Tim Pawlenty had a good line in his last run around the country saying, you know, if you don't believe incentives matter, try going to a wedding where there's an open bar versus a wedding where there's a cash bar. Which one do you have more fun in? Incentives and prices of things related really do matter. And so we began in wealth estates to score a lot of things, not just from the IRS migration of adjusted gross income, generally from high tax states to low tax states, but we also look at FAA passenger traffic. Despite the buzz and the hub bias that you would naturally expect in LaGuardia, in Atlanta, in Chicago O'Hara, and in California, there are noticeable increases in traffic, not only for tourism and trade, but in indigenous growth in states like Florida. We look at U-Haul prices. U-Haul.com gives us a real-time look at rational human behavior. And it might not surprise many of you that the cost to get a U-Haul 10x14, leaving Dallas, going to California, is very different than the price renting one from Los Angeles back to Dallas. And we scored that over months and looked at how that correlates to a lot of other information over the long term. So we know that information is power, and we want to leave you, for those that aren't as familiar with that evidence, of our smartphone applications. This is an example of where I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, outside of St. Louis. And it was our original genesis of how we came to learn the IRS tax flight that was available to all of us for a low, low price of $500 at your Internal Revenue Service. But what was not available was a navigable, searchable, intelligible, localizable way of understanding what all the taxpayer returns were doing. So we developed an app in addition to the book that tracks the bad news for my home county of St. Louis County. We knew people were coming to Florida. We knew entrepreneurs were going to Texas. We couldn't measure it in a specific way, and people weren't putting yard signs up when they left and sold their house. They weren't always talking about the weather or talking about more time on their boat. They were just quietly exiting, and they were doing that in Detroit. They've been doing that in Cincinnati. They've been doing it in Pittsburgh, and they've been doing it in Indianapolis. They've been doing it in Milwaukee and Minneapolis and the Twin Cities, and they have all landed very close to these score numbers that we see from St. Louis County. And for whatever reason, Midwesterners love the Gulf Coast more so than the Atlantic Coast, and Collier County is showing over $400 million of Hennepin County, Minnesota, into its market in the last 18 years. Places like Lee are not too far behind, and the entire state shows very persistent trends when it comes to this. And so that's a little bit for anyone that has a taste beyond how Money Walk's book. Download it for yourselves. Walk out and get it for your district. You can search every county, every city, and every state and see the results for yourselves. They should match the reality. Why? Because this is not a survey. It's not a regression. It's not a focus group. It's not a sample. This is the aggregate of all the adjusted gross income returns for the people that have been working sometime over the period since Al Gore invented the internet in 1992. You remember when Al Gore invented the internet? So we have digital records from 1992 all the way to 2010. Now we're updating those figures for 2011, just released by the IRS. They claim to be very busy up there doing other things they don't normally do, which I guess is why it's 10 or 12 months late from the data we normally get. But we don't just look at tax flight as evidence, although that correlation is astounding. In Wealth of States, we also introduce something else that's coming on as a result, ironically enough, wait for it, of American entrepreneurship, right? Innovation where we never expected it. We also look at energy, and I won't steal all of Steve's thunder, but both he and I were at another event in Oklahoma last week with this man who is largely responsible for helping us guide our way through the expansion of the energy revolution in America. Now, how many people have ever downloaded an update of Microsoft Outlook or a new program and gotten frustrated when you click on it and it says, you know, you have 8 minutes to complete the download. You come back after a cup of coffee 9 minutes later and it says you have 23 minutes left to make that download. Well, this is similar to the argument that was taking place less than 5 to 7 years ago in energy. And our envelope, our capacity in America has greatly expanded because of some risk-taking entrepreneurs. And that's what makes it very incredible here. So part of the energy boom that we do score econometrically in Wealth of States shows us that states with energies, states, whether it's water, resources, and things like certainly petroleum, and inputs to these things. A lot of people don't think about the inputs that go into it. You know what you need to frack? If you really want good fracking, you have to have good sand. You know where good sand comes from? I'm told Governor Walker has the best sand in America. So he may not have oil, but he has sand. And Florida has water and a lot of sunshine and a lot of portals to the world that can lead a lot of this capacity. And we begin to score a lot of that out here. So that's a little bit about sneak previews of other topics that Steve will expound on nationally. I want to just whet your appetite for people that haven't seen anything about the tax migration or the other data we have also outside on the touchscreen television and get to how extreme the cases are. What we have selected here is a visual look at what I just mentioned, over 18-year cumulative loss or gain of adjusted gross income, and we've selected for our initial purposes the Empire State of New York. Who's from New York? Anyone? Got a few of you. It's okay. You can raise your hand. New York happens to be America's biggest loser, and it is a cumulative loss over 18 years in our analysis here of $68.1 billion. Now that's, again, we're playing, unless I'm the former speaker here and I know how to play with appropriations, I don't know what 68 billion of anything looks like. So let's translate it down to a number we can manage, right? A New York minute now costs, on average of every minute of every day of every year for the last 18 years on average. A New York minute now costs $7,200 in lost adjusted gross income. Start spreading the news. And where are they leaving to? You know it better than I. $18.9 billion worth of it is coming right here. There is a north-south relationship that no one can deny, culturally and a lot of other things. $7,200 a minute. By contrast, so the states, where is it going in addition to Florida being its biggest victor in New Jersey and the regional effects? States in green are receiving New York income at New York's expense. Got it? Still with me? Marley could test me here if she was, keeping up with me. So if we click on, by contrast, America's biggest winner, which is you, Florida, we see the country goes from green to red. Red states are contributing net of all transfers. So your son or daughter graduates the University of Florida, finds gainful work in California. They're part of the net loss out of Florida for the periods that they were working, and anyone coming in as a new resident is part of the net gains, depending on when they have moved in or out. And let's look at U.S. employment, by the way, as an example. We've been measuring total U.S. employment since 1976. And by our analysis, if you score this a different way, the 9 states like Florida that do not put a tax on personal income have collectively gained over $164 billion over the period. And the reverse is also true. The states with the highest personal income tax burden have lost nearly $150 billion. And if you look at U.S. total employment, it will not surprise anyone here that we have a record number of people who still have some kind of employment today who live and work and call themselves a resident of a state like Florida with no personal income tax is made and collected. 1 in 5 Americans who have a job now live in a state like this. This is not something you'll often read on the New York Times, but we think it's very important evidence showcasing what the future of America is beginning to look like. I can't leave without another comparison to Texas, since it's, at least have one Gator Nation supporter here that probably wants to know. We're talking about $25 billion there by contrast. So outperforming to some extent on Fortune 500 moves and corporate income, but not seeing as much individual income by a factor of 2.5 times. We've got a lot of other rankings that you can go to on howmoneywalks.com. I can just run through a couple examples of other things. You see different tabs there. Red states, blue states, property tax data, state taxes per capita, other indices, scoring it all out. Doesn't matter whether you're with the Chamber of Commerce or Kiplinger looking at retiree friendliness, or whether you're looking at other income analysis. Florida's doing pretty well, and state taxes per capita makes it very competitive overall in total tax burden when you score out even relative to Texas. I'll wind down that quick analysis and be happy to take other questions online after tonight. If anyone wants to send anything to howmoneywalks.com or wealthofstates.com, just know that there's a lot of evidence available to you online and otherwise that can really chart this out. In the words of the great Missouri philosopher, not Mark Twain, but Sheryl Crow, it's not having what you want, it's wanting what you've got. And so every state has unique assets here. And so much of that conversation that I know many of you are having, it's a real treat to be able to hopefully contribute more evidence and give you more confidence and competence that there's a great story to tell. I'm going to turn it over for the Major League pitcher now, the closer, the person is going to tell you how to fix Washington, D.C. and keep all this evidence expanding so that your envelope of liberty is broader than ever. Steve Moore, welcome.
Thank you, Travis. What a great night this is. Thank you, Bob, so much for inviting me to come to JMI. I remember when we got started, this was just this little state think tank, and to see how much it's grown and in terms of its influence is just a fantastic thing. I want to make one serious point right from the outset, because this is really important. I don't know how many of you are following what's happening on the left right now and this assault that's going on by these major George Soros organizations to try to silence the conservative state think tanks around the country. But it's a very serious thing, and they're going after the funding. They're going after these organizations that have been so influential. JMI here in Florida, Texas Policy Foundation in Texas, the Mackinac Institute in Michigan, and these groups have a lot of money to spend to try to discredit and basically put a muzzle over what these great organizations do. Now, I would make the case to you, by the way, the fact that these groups that George Soros funds are spending literally millions and tens of millions of dollars to try to silence groups like JMI. I mean, that is really one of the great tributes to how influential this organization is. And and we should be taking this very seriously. They're going to be challenging these organizations in court, trying to require them to disclose their donors. I don't know if this is happening here at JMI, but a lot of the state think tanks are facing this. And, by the way, it's interesting. I did a piece in National Review about this very issue. And I made the point, I called a lot of these organizations that are, saying, oh, it's dark money, and they're all Koch funded and so on and so forth, and they're not disclosing their donors. And I called these left-wing groups and I said, well, how many of you do you disclose your donors? Oh, no, we don't disclose our donors, but we want, JMI and Texas Policy Foundation to do the same. The reason I bring this up is I really believe, and I have so much fun. Travis and I have been traveling around the country. I always say he's the ad and I'm the nauseum, and this message of how important taxes and stuff are. And these state think tanks have an incredible influence. They really do. And I always say that they're little kind of, because most of the groups like JMI are located in state capitals, and you're like these little islands of fiscal capitalist sanity in these kind of oceans of socialism. And so it's so important that we have these groups. And one of the things I would really urge you to do, seriously, think about the next time you make your contribution to JMI, maybe put an extra 0 on that check. I mean, seriously, because you really want to put the hurt to George Soros, gave more money to groups like that. And by the way, I'm very serious about that. I think bang for the buck, and I think it's hard to find a better investment in America's future and Florida's future than groups like the James Madison Institute. I wanted to talk, Travis did such a fantastic job of talking about what's happening in the states and why taxes matter. I wanted to just talk a little bit, if I could, about what's happening nationally and kind of give you a little flavor for the national outlook. And by the way, I don't know how many of you saw today on CNN. I was at the airport, and I was turned on CNN, and sure enough, there was President Obama, and I don't know how many of you saw that he was in Michigan today at a grade school, and he was kind of selling his economic program, more money from schools, more money for infrastructure and so on, and he was in this little class with fifth graders and kids the age of Kaylee who did such a great job giving us the Pledge of Allegiance, and he started taking questions from the fifth graders. I don't know how many of you saw this on C-SPAN, and he finally, he asked these kids questions. The little boy in the front of the room is wildly waving his hand, and the president says, "Son, what is your name?" And he said, "Well, Mr. President, my name is Oliver." "Well, Oliver, what is your question?" Well, Oliver, I mean, he just couldn't believe it. He says, "Well, Mr. President, I just wanted to know if you have any regrets about what happened in Benghazi, and that you didn't send help earlier, and maybe save the lives of our ambassador, and all the Americans working there." And then I just have one follow-up question, Mr. President. When you said that if you like the health insurance you have, you'd get to keep it, Mr. President, my parents just lost their health insurance, and I wonder what you would say to my parents. And Mr. President, were you lying when you told the American people that if you like your health insurance, you could have it? Well, you could see President Obama, I mean, straighten his tie, trying to figure out how to answer this question. And I'm not making this up, all of a sudden the bell rings and these kids rush outside for recess. And they come back about 20 minutes later and reassemble, and the president's still there, and he says, "Well, I just wanted to see where we were. Where were we? Oh, yes, I was taking questions. Are there any questions from the kids?" Well, this little girl waves her hand kind of bashfully, and he says, "Young lady, what's your name?" She says, "Well, my name is Grace." "Well, Grace, what is your question?" "Well, Mr. President, I just have 2 questions for you this morning. First, why is it the recess bell went off 15 minutes early today? And my second question, sir, is, what the hell happened to Oliver?" And I love that story, right? Anyway, so I wanted to, how many of you, as you know, I've made the transition over to the Heritage Foundation. I'm so proud to be at Heritage. I think it's one of the great great think tank in Washington. But I'm also still a contributor to the Wall Street Journal, so I'm still writing monthly for the Journal. I'll have a piece in there in the next couple of days. How many of you read the Wall Street Journal editorial page pretty regularly? Thank you for doing that. I think it's a great paper. It's a tough business, by the way, being in the newspaper business, but I got to tell you this. I got to give you some, really good news. We're making some money at the Wall Street Journal, which is a good thing in the newspaper business. Any of you recently looked at the financials of the New York Times? That newspaper is about this close to being in federal bankruptcy court, and it just couldn't happen to a nicer group of people. I mean, it's just amazing to see what's happening with that paper. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about just the national outlook, and Travis kind of talked a little bit about this, but let me give you just my quick view on the economy. I'm an optimist. I'm an Art Laffer, Ronald Reagan optimist. I do think things are looking up for this country, despite all the crazy things that are happening in Washington. And one of the reasons I am so optimistic is precisely what Travis was talking about, that we are now living through something that nobody would have predicted 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. Nobody saw this coming. In fact, it's such a tribute to American ingenuity and technological progress and the kind of entrepreneurial spirit of America that we are now living through the biggest oil and gas boom in the history of America. We've never seen anything like this. And it's just an incredible phenomenon to see. I mean, as recently as 3 years ago, President Obama was running around the country giving these speeches talking about how we have to invest in green energy because we're running out of oil and gas. I mean, we said, well, America's running out of oil and gas. We have to invest in windmills and solar power. Well, Mr. President, we are not running out of oil and gas in America. We are running into it in a way that we have just almost never seen. And I always like to ask people this question. I think probably most of you know the answer to this. Travis, you can't answer this because I know you do know the answer. But of all the 50 states in the country, what state do you think has the lowest unemployment rate today? Anyone know? I heard a bunch of you shout it out. North Dakota. North Dakota is an amazing place. The official unemployment rate, if you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they will tell you the unemployment rate in North Dakota is 3%. I'm here to tell you that's a bald-faced lie. The unemployment rate is not 3%. It's negative in North Dakota. That is to say there are 15,000 more jobs to be filled than there are people to fill those jobs. And I get to go over to these wonderful places. I come to Florida a lot and so on. But 2 years ago, I went up to North Dakota to see what was going on there and visited Harold Hamm, the guy who owns a lot of that oil in North Dakota. And how many of you in this room have ever been to the state of North Dakota, by the way? Raise your hand. I had been to every continental state in the United States. I had never been to North Dakota. And, you go up there, you're in the Great Plains. It is so damn cold up there. I went there in February. It didn't get above zero the whole time I was there. Not a lot out there. I went to this little town of Williston, North Dakota. And Williston, are you from North Dakota? There's actually someone from North Dakota here. Anyway, I mean, do you know Williston? What?
It's not the end of the world.
Yeah, well, it was cold. But I have to say, you go to North Dakota today, I don't know when you were back there most recently, I mean, it felt to me like what it must have been like during the gold rush era in California in the mid-19th century. I mean, it's just go, go, go. I mean, I had to spend $299 to stay at a Best Western hotel in Williston. There's just nowhere to stay there. I mean, even the strippers are leaving Las Vegas now, and they are going to Williston because, you don't think, incentives matter, look at what's happening there. But anyway, what's going on, obviously, is this drilling revolution, and it's driven by these two technologies that Travis mentioned. The first is this horizontal drilling. How many of you have heard of horizontal drilling? I mean, it is an incredible thing. These drills now go 2 to 3 miles deep in the ground, and then what horizontal drilling has allowed these oil rigs to do is go in any direction like a spider web, and it has made these rigs incredibly more productive and efficient. And so that's one thing. And of course, the other is what Travis mentioned is fracking, where they're emitting at very rapid speeds water and sand and chemicals into the shale rock. And by the way, the shale rock is incredibly thick and dense. It's like 18 inches thick, and it's like armor plate. And by the way, we've known for millions of years, well, the oil and gas has been there for millions of years. We've known for 100 years it's been there. We just never had the technological capacity to get at it. And what fracking and horizontal drilling allows us to do is get at that oil and gas. And the cool thing about this story is because of these technologies, ladies and gentlemen, there is more oil and natural gas in North Dakota than there is in Saudi Arabia. Now, that is an amazing thing to think about, right? And I know that deserves applause. And it's not just happening, by the way, in North Dakota. It's obviously North Dakota is going gangbusters. Texas, is a state that in just the last 5 years has tripled its oil output. Tripled its oil output in 5 years. Oklahoma, where we were just last week, has more than doubled its oil output, and it's happening all over the country. How many of you have heard about the Marcellus Shale? Probably almost everyone in this room. The Marcellus Shale is a really, is the largest natural gas find in North America in at least 75 years. There's about 150 years worth of natural gas in the Marcellus Shale. Again, we're not running out of this stuff by any means. And it goes from West Virginia into states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, spills into upper state New York. And these people are getting rich off of this. One of the reasons you're seeing a kind of nice recovery now in some of these Midwestern states is precisely because of this drilling boom. And one of my favorite parts of the story, if you don't think there's a difference between blue states and red states, the best example I can give you is that while, some of these states like West Virginia and Pennsylvania and Texas are going just full speed ahead with the fracking and the horizontal drilling. You know, the people in New York, in Albany, and you know, the pinheads there, what they decided was no fracking, right? We are not going to allow fracking, and it's a damn shame, by the way, because that oil and gas spills over into places like Rochester and Syracuse and places that are really economically depressed, the places that people are leaving, Travis, and they could really use those jobs. But no, these liberal congressmen, senators and state senators and assemblymen who care so much about the working man and woman, they say there's going to be no fracking. So here's my favorite part of the story. You know what they're doing in Pennsylvania right now? They're drilling down, they're going horizontally underneath New York, and they're taking out all their oil and gas. I mean, only in America could you see that happen. So why is it an important story? Why is this transforming the American economy? Because if we continue on this pace, and we continue to drill as we should be. By the way, let me just say as an aside, I don't know how many of you saw yesterday that Joe Biden actually, if you want to talk about nerve and chutzpah, Joe Biden went to the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania, and he was claiming credit for this oil and gas boom. And I think, as everyone in this room knows, President Obama has done everything he possibly can to stop this, right? You're all following what's happened with the Keystone Pipeline, right? The decision that just came out last week, which to me is an absurdity. I mean, he's basically denying Americans 10,000 jobs that pay anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 a year. He's saying, no, we can't build this pipeline. And yet then Joe Biden goes to Pennsylvania and talks about how wonderful the Obama administration does because they made this thing happen. Well, the point I'm making is if we continue to push forward with this, within 5 years, and this is something I've been saying for a long time, now it's almost become a conventional wisdom, the United States of America, this great, great, great country of ours, is going to move from being an oil and gas import country to an oil and gas export country. And that is a game changer when it comes to our economy. I mean, what is the one thing we spend more money on than anything else? In terms of imports, oil. We still spend about $300 billion a year on this stuff, and it doesn't just tie into the economy. Obviously, the economic implications of this are huge, but think about what it means for our national security. I mean, I'm not a national security expert, but I do know this. What is the Ukraine crisis all about? At its root, what are they fighting about? Why does Russia want that land? Why do they want them to go into Crimea? It's all about those pipelines, right? Because the vast majority of the Russian economy right now is just shipping oil and gas into Western Europe. And that's what they're concerned about. One of the things, if I were President Obama's advisor, I'd say, how do we respond to Putin, this monster? What we ought to be doing is drilling every single barrel of oil and natural gas that we can in this country and sending it to Western Europe so they're not 90% dependent on Russia for their oil and gas. I mean, how many of you are with me with that? Shouldn't we be doing that? Shouldn't we start to send this oil and gas to our allies in Western Europe? So it's a great, great news story. And by the way, it's having incredible ramifications for our manufacturing industry. We're really seeing a rebound in states like Michigan. Obviously, Florida is seeing a nice rebound in manufacturing. A lot of this is driven by our low cost of electricity. Now, by the way, we're actually, you want to hear a great pro-America story. In the last 6 weeks or so, we keep hearing more and more stories at the Wall Street Journal about German companies. You talk about German manufacturing and German engineering. German companies now want to close down their plants in Germany, and guess where they want to move to? The United States and places like Florida, places like Texas, all over the South. They want to come here, and the reason they do is because Germany made a big, big wrong bet 10 years ago in all this green energy stuff, and now they're realizing the future is oil and gas, and they want to get into fracking, but these companies are moving out. And so it's a real story of economic revival. Now, let me make a second point about this, about why we should feel optimistic about the U.S. economy. That is, when I was at the Journal, we would meet almost every week with some of the major CEOs of Fortune 100 companies. We would meet with people who run venture capital firms that are really injecting that needed seed capital into these companies that will become the future Googles and Apples and so on. And also a lot of just medium-sized business CEOs. And we would talk to them and we'd look over their books. And the thing that's amazing about American companies today, and this is something to be very proud of as Americans, is how the American companies, without with very few exceptions, they have retooled themselves, they have re-engineered themselves, they have sweat out all that debt that they took on. If you looked at the books of American companies 7 or 8 years ago, they were a disaster, right? I mean, way over leveraged, flabby, inefficient. They've gotten rid of a lot of that. Now, the point I'm making is today you look at American companies, and this is something I would not have said as an economist 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. The best run companies in the world today are American companies. They really are. The American companies are incredibly productive and profitable right now. That's a very good news story. Now, the obvious thing to think about then is, if American companies are doing so well, which they are, why aren't we seeing the kind of economic rebound we should be seeing in this country today? As John Boehner says every day, where are the jobs? Where are they? Why aren't these companies taking those profits, reinvesting them in the economy, and making, bringing the unemployment rate down and expanding their operations? And I would make the case to you that this isn't happening. In fact, if you look at, again, the Wall Street Journal about 2 weeks ago had an article that American companies are sitting on about $1.5 trillion. $1.5 trillion of capital that should be reinvested in the company, but what are they doing? They're buying treasury bills with this stuff. They're in cash. They're not reinvesting it. And then you ask the question, why not? And I think you all know the answer to that. It's that 4-letter F word, right? Fear. Fear. These companies are terrified. And this was the response we get every time we ask these company CEOs, why aren't they investing? What are they afraid of? What are they afraid of? They are afraid of what is the next shoe that is going to drop from Washington, D.C., right? I mean, they lived through tax increases under Obama, cash for clunkers, all these. By the way, I have to just say this. I mentioned Joe Biden. There was a cartoon in the paper the other day because, Joe Biden, almost every day he says, some crazy thing, a total embarrassment to the White House. And there's this great, I can't even remember his last flub, but I think it was when he said, that 3-letter word, JOBS, But anyway, he's walking down there's a cartoon and Obama is carrying him like as a piece of luggage, of lumber, and he goes up to this window and it says, trade in, cash for clunkers. I thought that was really perfect for Joe Biden. In any case, so we got to get these American companies to reinvest. Now, the reason they aren't is because they're so terrified about these injections of kind of socialism and regulation that come from Washington. And I want to just mention 2 things, if I may, and then I will kind of turn it over to the next speaker. One is, I've been thinking, Travis, as we've traveled around the country, kind of trying to be the Pied Piper of this message that low tax rates matter and that less regulation matters and right to work matters. And you are doing so many of the right things here in Florida. And I keep thinking we're winning. We're winning. And it is true on the state level. The action is at the state level. And because people around the country are seeing what's happening in Florida, and they're seeing what's happening in Texas, they're seeing what's happening in Tennessee, 3 states with no income tax, they're starting to see, we better get our tax rates down so we can compete. So that's the good news. And yet, how many of you saw this in the last week or two? There is a new book out. I think the good news is I think our book is higher on the New York Times bestselling list than this book. But there's this book out by this new French economist. Have any of you seen this guy by the name of Thomas Piketty? If you read the New York Times, they write floweringly about this people, like in adulation. He's the smartest economist in the world. By the way, why in the world would anybody listen to a French economist, right? But no, he is the new guru of the left, and he has this new book out. And I am not making this up. What he recommends, Travis, he recommends that the way that the United States economy can revive is to institute an 80% income tax rate in the United States. 80%. This guy is nuts. And the New York says, oh yeah, this is exactly the formula for economic revival. These people have learned nothing. They want to go back to the 1970s. And even the 70s under Jimmy Carter, our top rate was only 70%. That's what we're up against, this kind of nonsense. And of course, the other big thing that we're up against is what has happened with the worst law that has passed in Congress in 50 years. And that is Obamacare. And this bill is a travesty, and it is ruining our economy. I'm not a healthcare expert, so I'm not going to talk about all the adverse effects that it's having on our healthcare system, but I am a labor market expert. And I do talk a lot of times to people who actually are real employers, who actually, write the front end, sign the front end of the paychecks. And what they tell me is they are stopping hiring workers right now precisely because of Obamacare. Now, this is outrageous. We have 20 million Americans today that are still either out of work, have dropped out of the labor force, or can't find a full-time job. And Obamacare is incentivizing businesses not to hire more workers. Now, how many of you in this room have ever heard the term, how many of you know what a 49er is? And I'm not talking about a San Francisco 49er. What's a 49er? What's a 49er? Exactly. A business that has capped its employment at 49 workers. Now, why would a business do that? Why would a business say no more than 49? And the answer, I think, as almost everyone in this room knows, is because under the Obamacare law, if you hire 50 or more, you face this huge cliff of extra costs. Because the Obamacare law says once you're at 50, all of these new regulations, all of these new mandates, all of these new costs fall upon you. So businesses are getting below 50. I talk to a lot of employers, by the way, who have 60 or 70 workers, who say they're going to lay off 10 or 15 workers to get below the 50 worker threshold. It is happening across America. Now, how many of you know what a 29er is? Anybody know what a 29er is? What's a 29er? Yep, 29 hours a week. So the other kind of dysfunction of the Obamacare law is it says if you hire a worker for more than 30 hours a week, that person is considered a full-time employee. By the way, since when in America is a 30 hours a week a full-time job? Right? I mean, but I'm just wondering that. But in any case, if you hire somebody for more than 30 hours a week, that worker has to be covered with all of the Obamacare mandates and costs. And so what employers are doing around the country is they are now hiring workers 20, 25, 28 hours a week, but not 40. And this is happening around the country. I gave a talk about 2 months ago to the National Restaurant Association. These are people, the restaurants industry in America hires about 30 million Americans. So this is by far the biggest employment industry in America. And these are, I was talking to about 400 of these guys. These are men and women who own Burger Kings and Arby's and, McDonald's and Popeyes restaurants. And after I got done with my talk and talked about how terrible Obamacare was, these men and women came up to me and said, Steve, it's much worse than you even imagined. They said, and some of them told the story about they're now doing job sharing. I don't know if you've all heard about this. What they're doing is, now, you know how in almost every city in America, the Burger King and the McDonald's are across the street from each other? So what they're doing is the workers get a job 20 hours a week at the McDonald's, they go across the street, work 20 hours at the Burger King, and vice versa. And they're doing that just to get around this stupid law. Again, it just makes me want to pull my hair out, Travis, when these liberals say incentives don't matter, right? Businesses don't respond to this stuff. Oh, yes, they sure do. And we're seeing that in this law. Obamacare, the single most important thing in America today to get the American economy moving is a very simple two-word strategy. Repeal Obamacare. We have got to repeal this god-awful law. And Republicans, by the way, need to be talking about free market alternatives. I mean, I actually agree with some of the Democratic critics who say, well, the Republicans just want to say how terrible this law is. It's time that Republicans come up with the kind of free market alternatives. I know JMI has been doing some great work on this. But we know, President Obama is right. Health care costs too much in America today. President Obama is right about that. But we know the problem is too much government interference in this market, not too little. I always tell the story, about 4 or 5 years ago, I was in Colorado skiing, and I was just this snowboarder comes from behind me. He just takes me out. I go flying. I wrench my shoulder. And when I got home to Northern Virginia, I couldn't even raise my left arm above my shoulder, and I'm left-handed, so that was a big problem. So I went to see the orthopedic surgeon. He gave me the MRI, the x-rays, and he said, Steve, you've got a bit of a problem here. He said, the problem is that you've torn your rotator cuff. It's a small tear. He said, but you've got two options now. He said, one option is I can take you under the knife and I can give you some surgery and we can stitch this up. Or the second option is we can deal this maybe with physical therapy and so on, and you can do some, see the therapist once a week, and maybe that'll build up the muscles, but you'll always be at risk of tearing it again. And so I remember I'm sitting in this chair thinking about this as the president, as doctor was explaining this to me, and I finally turned to the doctor and I said, well, doctor, I just have one question for you. I said, if I have this surgery, about how much money is it going to cost? And he looked at me with the strangest look on his face. And he said, Steve, I've got to tell you something. He said, in the last 20 years that I've been doing these surgeries, you are the first patient who ever asked me how much it's going to cost. Now that's amazing, isn't it? I mean, surgery is one of the most important things we as consumers are going to buy. We're Americans. We always ask what things cost, right? I mean, it'd be like going to a new car showroom and say, I love that red sports car, and buying it without, asking how much it costs. And the most amazing part of that story, the finish of that story, is then the doctor said to me, by the way, Steve, I have no idea how much it costs. I mean, when you have a system where neither the doctor nor the patient know what these things cost, you've got a total dysfunction in the way the pricing system works. And if we re-injected consumers as kind of cost-conscious consumers, you would drive down costs, you would improve quality. And I know JMI has been doing some of the great work on this. So my message is simply this, that I really honestly believe America is so close to being on the precipice of just a gigantic expansion. I mean, the kind of expansion we saw in this country when Ronald Reagan became president in the 80s, and then even further expanded under Bill Clinton in the 90s. We had the greatest period of wealth creation in the history of this country in the 80s and 90s, and that's what the American people are waiting for. I always tell the story I promised, Bob, this will be my last thing, because we're running over, but this is important. I think somebody earlier mentioned Paul Krugman. You all know Paul Krugman. He writes for the New York Times. He's this wacko, left-wing economist. He just doesn't have his tray table in the upright lock position on any of this stuff. He doesn't get any of it. But was talking about what was it that he? Oh, we were. I'm trying to remember. Now I lost my train of thought. It was about about this stuff about the tax rates, and he kept saying that tax rates just don't matter. And I said, well, look, he said, his response to the stuff that Travis just showed you is people are just moving to these places because they're warmer. That's why they move, because it's warmer in Florida and there's nicer weather. It doesn't have anything to do with taxes or regulation and so on. And I couldn't believe it. I said, Paul, do you really believe that? And now, look, of course, there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, if you wanted to live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, or Fort Lauderdale, Florida, obviously it's a nicer place to live in Fort Lauderdale. But I said, explain to me this, Paul. Why is there people, if it's all about weather, why are people moving from San Diego to Houston? Right? Because it ain't because of the weather. And he was like, blah, blah, blah. He had no response to that. But the other thing that he said was that I showed him this graphic that shows that if we had the economic growth over the last 5 years that we had under Ronald Reagan. And actually Reagan and Obama have a lot in common, right? They both came into office during terrible economic crises, during meltdowns in the economy. And so, how many of you old enough to remember 20% mortgage interest rates and 14% inflation under Carter and so on? I mean, the economy was in wreckage back then. And of course, when Obama came in, he's right. The economy had lost 7 million jobs. The stock market was in a free fall. So this is a wonderful experiment, right? These two presidents came in and they did diametrically the opposite approaches to dealing with the crisis, right? What did Reagan do? He cut tax rates. He cut spending. He deregulated the economy. We got inflation under control by controlling the money supply. We used a supply-side pro-growth, pro-business kind of strategy to get the economy going. What did Obama do? Exactly the opposite, right? He came in with all of the spending, remember the $830 billion stimulus plan, and then we had cash for clunkers and Obamacare and $6 trillion of borrowing, all these things to, try to get government spending to stimulate the economy. So the question I asked Paul Krugman at this event is, I said, Paul, let's just look at the results. Which one worked better, right? Which policy strategy worked better? And the answer to that question is, if the economy had grown as fast under Barack Obama over the last 5 years as it did under Ronald Reagan, the U.S. economy today would be $2 trillion larger. $2 trillion. Now, that's an incomprehensibly large number, but one way to think about this, if you were to spread that money evenly to every family in America would be $15,000 richer if we had the Reagan economy instead of the Obama economy. So what is the lesson here? It's that incentives do matter. It's that free markets matter, and it's groups like JMI and the Heritage Foundation and others that are fighting this fight every day that are making a difference. And once we take over, and once we beat her in 2016, whether it's, Jeb Bush or whether it's Marco Rubio, great Floridians, or Rand Paul, whoever it might be, or, I love the governor of Wisconsin. I think whoever it is that beats her, and we are going to beat her in 2016, you're going to see the biggest economic boom in this country you ever saw. Thank you very much for having me. It's been great to be here in Florida. Thank you.
Travis and Steve, thank you very much for that. You know, facts really matter, but images also matter too, and personalities, and the presentation was superb. Thank you guys, and please join me in giving them one more round of applause. That was outstanding. I want to introduce to you my board chairman, former Speaker of the House, Alan Bentz. Alan has been my board chairman for about 5 years and has really just been stupendous. You know, certainly I can tell you that he was elected to the House in 1998. I can certainly tell you that he became Speaker of the House in 2004. But you can read his bio. You can just Google his name and read his bio. There are two things I want you to understand about Alan. The first is that Alan is the kind of public servant the founders envisioned when they began to pull this country together. Alan is a devoted family man with 3 children and a wonderful wife, Tony. He worked and worked and worked and has built numerous successful businesses over in Bay County and even beyond that. He is a wonderful grandfather. He calls me the other day. We were talking about JMI business. I said, Alan, what are you doing? He said, I'm going down to Pasco County. I'm taking my grandchildren back home to see Will and Courtney. And that's the kind of guy he is. But the other thing you need to understand about Alan is that he did his hitch. He could have run for numerous different offices, and in fact was begged to do so, but he didn't do it. He went back home, took care of his businesses, is a husband, a father, a grandfather. He has 3 children, 2 boys, and some of you may not know this, that his daughter Courtney is married to the current Speaker of the House, Will Weatherford, who's here. Mr. President, Speaker, we're glad you guys are with us. And so I'd like him to come forward. He knows both of these gentlemen. He's close friends with both of these gentlemen. And I'd like you to join me in welcoming my board chairman, who I would tell you this, his own daughter probably thinks that he's only the 2nd best House Speaker in the history of the state of Florida.
Thanks, Bob.
All right. I tell you, it's a tough act to follow with Travis and Steve. I mean, they are, let me tell you, Steve Moore has been a huge supporter of JMI really almost since we began. And thank you so much, Steve. You've spoken to us on numerous occasions, and you know, your thoughts and beliefs just, you're great. You're the best. And Bob, great job as always. We're going to have a closing a little bit later on where I make a little cattle call for money, you know. So don't leave. You know, that's part of it. I haven't forgotten some things. I haven't forgotten yet. But it's an honor for me to introduce 2 fellows that I happen to really respect and admire. And no offense, Mr. President, but one of you I love, and that's my son-in-law, Will Weatherford. I like you, Mr. President, but I don't love you yet, you know? You're not family. But having said that, I was ill last year and came home for Christmas. Was able to stay home. And President Gaetz has a home about 5 or 6 homes down from my home. And, of course, Will was home for Christmas. So we all had Christmas together. You can just imagine the conversation that day around the table with Will, Don Gaetz, and my sister, the president of the University of West Florida, was there too. She was trying to weasel in to get some of her stuff on their agenda, but whatever. But it was a heck of a Christmas dinner. It was wonderful. And anyway, we're very honored in Florida to have 2 really great leaders of the Florida House and Florida Senate. They get along. Now, there's 10 days to go. I can't guarantee what's going to happen in the next 10 days. In fact, I was telling Will today, buddy, you're in about the 7th inning. He said, gosh, we began back in September. I said, you're in the 7th inning. And he gets it now. After last year, they both kind of get it. So anyway, it's an honor for me to introduce to you. And it really is neat that we can get the presiding officers of the chambers here for dinner, along with Steve Moore and Travis. What a great turnout. But gentlemen, why don't you ease up here, and they're going to each speak, and for a few minutes. Oh yeah, they're going to head over there, and then we're going to do a Q&A for a few minutes. Don't throw any hard questions to them, whatever you do. Well, not least, not controversial questions, but where should they go, Bob? All right. Okay, guys. Speaker, man. How are you? Hey. Mr. President, how are you?
Buddy. Good to see you, man. Thank you. So, President, thank you very much. Thanks for being here.
They've got to say, they have to say a few things. Are they mic'd up?
Yeah, they
Mic'd up.
are. They are mic'd up.
I think.
Yeah.
So, President Gaetz, why don't you open up, and then Speaker Weatherford, you say a few things, then Q&A. Is that okay?
Do I have to sit next to him?
Clearly, it's the last 7 days of session.
Well, I want you to know that even though Speaker Weatherford and I are appearing at the same time in the same place, our lieutenants are locked at this moment in deadly combat. We left them back at the Capitol at each other's throats. Now, there is a little bit of a difference between what they're doing and what's happening in Washington. In Washington, they're trying to find out which taxes to raise, and Speaker Weatherford's lieutenants and my lieutenants are arguing about which taxes to cut.
All right.
And while in Washington, they're arguing about how they can exert more federal influence and control over education and reduce the choices and options available to parents, Speaker Weatherford's conferees and the Senate conferees are locked in deadly combat tonight over how they can expand school choice for parents in the state. And while in Washington, they're trying to figure out how to make us more dependent on the government, Speaker Weatherford's conferees and the Senate conferees are working tonight on how we can develop a plan that we can pass that can save our state's retirement system and establish more of a retirement system based on the free enterprise economy. So we're locked in deadly combat. But the difference between what we're doing and what's happening in Washington is that in a few days, when the gavels go down and when Will Weatherford and I will have a hard time even getting a ride to a place like this, let alone getting an audience, we will have met the critical needs of the people of Florida. Instead of adding to debts and deficits, we will have paid them down. We will have done something that other states and the federal government can't do. We're going to live within our means, we're going to balance the budget, and we're going to cut taxes. Now, let me say something else about this guy who is supposed to be my opponent, 200 steps away from the Senate chamber. Let me say that first of all, he's half as old as I am. But if you think about it, in 20 years, he won't be half as old as I am. And there is a point out there at which, actually, I will become younger than he is. Somewhere the lines will cross. But one thing that I think you really need to know, all of you who are Floridians, is not only is Will Weatherford the youngest Speaker of the House in America, he is the future of Florida.
Oh, wow.
Thank you.
Now, I would just make one other comment before I turn to the leader of the lower house. We call him the House of Commons. And that is that even though we try to be free enterprise, libertarian, conservatives, like all politicians, we pay attention to polls. And we get poll numbers all the time, right, Mike? We look at poll numbers all the time. We can't help ourselves. It's our crack. And so I've gotten the most recent poll numbers, and these are real. These are real. These are as real as the numbers that Steve gave you, and those were sort of real. Do you know what the current approval rating is of the United States Congress? You know what their approval rating is? 9%. 9%, according to the Gallup poll, 9% believe in the Congress of the United States. Under the same set of polling data, 29% of Americans believe in Bigfoot. 9% believe in Congress.
I believe in Bigfoot.
38%, that's 80 million Americans, believe in space aliens. Space aliens. Well, you've got to be able, in politics, to put these things together and make sense of them. Now, I can remember this just because I read about it, of course, but some of you, of course, would only read about it in history books, but you know that on July 8th, 1947, in Roswell, New Mexico, a UFO crashed. And 5 aliens were aboard, according to the reports that many of us have heard, and we understand that the federal government has covered this up and hasn't told us the truth about it. That you know. Here's what you may not know. In March 1948, exactly 9 months later, Al Gore, Hillary Rodham Clinton, John Kerry, Bill Clinton, Howard Dean, Nancy Pelosi, Barbara Boxer, and Charles Schumer were all born. Now you see, you can begin to sort of put these numbers together. And this polling data actually makes sense. But back to the polling data. Back to the polling data. Remember, 9% of people in this country have a favorable view of Congress. According to the August poll, more than 11% of Americans, slightly more than 11% of Americans, have a favorable view of cockroaches. Here's the kicker. When the cockroaches found out there were only 2 points up on Congress, they hired lobbyists. So we keep this kind of information and we use it as much as we can. Now look, Will Weatherford and Don Gaetz and the people we work with every day can make a lot of mistakes, and we do make a lot of mistakes. And as Speaker Weatherford will shortly tell you, most of the mistakes are made in the Senate. But we're not making the same kind of mistakes they make in other states and the same kind of mistakes that are made in Washington. If you pick up the blogs and the reports from California today, you know that the 3 top officials, elected officials of the state legislature of the state of California, have all been indicted for corruption and ethical violations of a grievous kind. That's in a state where the Democrats have a supermajority in the legislature and they control the governor's office. If you look at the state of New York, where we're often compared, and this year we will pass them in population for all the reasons that Steve Morris explained, you know that they just passed a state budget, and the governor of New York, Governor Cuomo, said that it's a bare bones budget. They have the same number of people as we have in Florida. Their budget is $141 billion, almost twice the budget that Speaker Weatherford and I and our colleagues will pass in a few days. They are taxing twice as much, they are spending twice as much for the same number of people, and that's why they're losing jobs. It's why we're gaining members of Congress, and it's why Florida will ultimately win the battle against the big industrial states. So, it's my pleasure to introduce someone who has become a trusted friend. He and I have issues, Mr. Speaker, that, as you know, we have to sort out in the next few days. But they are not issues about what goal we would seek, but rather which path up the mountain we would take to make sure that we get there sooner. Let me introduce to you someone who has led the Florida House of Representatives with great distinction, with great maturity, and with great success. The Speaker of the House, Will Weatherford.
Thank you. Well, good evening. How's everybody doing? Good. I'm honored to be here. Thank you, Mr. President. I cannot compete with the comedy shtick that you just heard right there. That is where age comes into play right there. That's experience. But it's an honor to be here tonight. And happy to see my father-in-law. You know, most people here know this, but you know, Alan Bentz was in the fight of his life 9 months ago. And I watched him go from, on Labor Day weekend, a perfectly high-functioning guy who was on the boat hanging out on a Sunday afternoon, and me going home in the car and driving home with my family, getting a call on Tuesday morning that he was in the emergency room and had lost complete feeling in his entire body. And went to go see him in a hospital in Shands on life support and fighting for his life. And it's wonderful to see in 6 months that a guy who is just an absolute fighter can go from fighting for his life to standing here today and being the great man that he is. So it's just wonderful to see you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. Been a great inspiration. I've enjoyed the last 2 years of being Speaker of the House, Mr. President. The relationship has been one that I've enjoyed very much, and we've done a lot. I'll tell you, being Speaker of the House is not a very big deal. My daughter, who's 6, Alan's granddaughter, Ella, I was taking her to school earlier this year, and on my way to school, she said to me, she said, "Daddy, I'm a little bit confused." And actually, they're driving to town right now. I don't know if you know, they're probably getting here right about now. But she said, "In Tallahassee, you're the Speaker of the House, right, Daddy?" And I said, "Yeah, that's right, honey. I'm the Speaker of the House." And she said, "Well, I just don't understand, because if you're the Speaker of the House in Tallahassee at the Capitol, how come Mommy's the Speaker of the House in our house?" And I said, "Well, you're absolutely right." I guess she picked up on that. And so Courtney, Alan's daughter, and my wife is the Speaker of our house. And however important I think I am or think I've been for the last 18 or 20 months, my wake-up calls come in about 10 days when I go home and have to start changing diapers again. So I want to say thank you to JMI and for the role that you've played in conservative leadership and fiscal responsibility and freedom in the state of Florida for the last several years. I know that a good friend of ours who couldn't be here tonight, and my father-in-law's mentor, Charlie Hilton, was very inspirational in helping make JMI what it is today. And I think probably inspired Alan quite a bit in his political career, and certainly has filtered its way down to me. But Bob, you've been a great friend. You've come and spoken to our caucus on numerous occasions and helped light the fire, keep the fire lit in the state of Florida, and helped remind us what we could be if we stuck to our principles. So thank you and JMI for everything you do for us in the state of Florida. We're grateful. Thank you. I'll be relatively quick, but I would say I thought I was coming here to negotiate my budget with the president. I had no idea that I was going to do it in front of 500 people, but if you want, we could start talking about it.
I got my notes.
Yeah. But, you know, Florida's in a very unique place. When I was elected in 2006, the same year that the president was, we came in, the state of Florida had a 4% unemployment rate, and things were pretty good. And we thought life was pretty good. We just had one of the most transformational governors the state of Florida had ever had, certainly maybe even the country had ever had, in Jeb Bush. Just come off the heels of a great speaker and Alan Bentz and many other leaders. And so life was good. And frankly, I think the state of Florida got a little bit lazy. We probably made some electoral mistakes that hopefully we won't make again this November. But we found ourselves 4 years later in the midst of a national crisis. And I watched our unemployment rate in 3 years go from 4% to almost 12%. And it was a dramatic experience. But this president and I had experienced it together. And there were different options we could take when we were facing that crisis. And I've heard reference to a lot of different states here tonight, but when you talk about Texas and New York, and you talk about Illinois and California, 2 of those states put their flag in the ground and said, we are going to embrace free enterprise, we are going to embrace low taxes, and we're going to embrace fiscal responsibility. And 3 of those states did not. And I know there's been a lot of statistics thrown around here real quick, but let me just give you one that continuously stays in my mind. Today, the state of Florida's unemployment rate is about 6%. The state of Texas has an unemployment rate of about 6%. California's unemployment rate is over 8%. Illinois' unemployment rate is around 8.5%. And New York's unemployment rate is somewhere between 7.5% and 8%. Now, numbers sound a little bit, they're hard to conceptualize or context, but let me just put it this perspective. If those 3 states I just referenced, whose unemployment rate is higher than ours in Texas, had the same unemployment rate that we have here in Florida, Mr. President, and the unemployment rate that Texas has, there would be 680,000 people with a job. If you live in one of those states, and you don't have a job, it may be because you happen to live in a state that does not embrace free enterprise and lower taxes and less government. That is a real dichotomy that is taking place. And what I'm most proud of is not just the trust that we have as presiding officers, because certainly things come up from time to time and there are disagreements between the chambers. It's not just the fact that we've run our chambers, I think, with great dignity and respect, but the fact that for 2 years, our focus has been not just to hold the line, not just to hope that everything works out and not mess up, but we've taken out significant, bold initiatives and said, we're not going to hit the brakes, we're going to hit the gas. And we're going to take on real problems and offer real solutions and do it together. And Mr. President, with 8 days to go in session, there's a lot to be worked out. And there are probably a lot of people in this room that will be impacted based on how those things are worked out. But I couldn't be more proud of the way that we've run our chambers together and the conservative leadership that the legislature together has worked on. And so it's an honor to be here with you tonight.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a few questions. Okay. Thank you both again for being here. We really appreciate it a lot. We have some really hardball questions we'd like to ask you, if you don't mind.
He'll take those.
Okay, that sounds great. And both of you have alluded to them. Just a few questions. We surveyed the group here, and they came up with a few questions that I wanted to ask you. First one, Mr. President, starts with you. As you kind of matriculate out, which would you say you are better known for now? Are you better known for being the Senate President of the third largest state in the country? Or are you better known for being Representative Matt Gaetz' dad?
Well, here's the problem. I thought that being Senate President would entitle me to some dignity, some deference, but now the most common question that we get in our office is there a way that Don could get us an appointment with Representative Gaetz? I'm pleased that Matt and I are the only senator representative father-son team in the state's history. If we're not careful, we may be the last. But I'm also pleased that my son Matt has taken a page from Speaker Benz and Speaker Weatherford's book, and that he stands for something, that he believes in what he believes in, that he's not afraid to stand up and speak his mind, even when he has to take on positions that in some cases may be unpopular with the press or unpopular with others. Speaker Benz said in a speech that he gave in Pensacola in 2006, all year long, the press has us by the throats. All year long, the liberal media says anything that they want to say about us. But thanks to the JMI, thanks to people who care about freedom and economic liberty in this state and in this country, for 2 months, we have the last say. And I remember, Speaker, when you said that in Pensacola at a JMI meeting, and I'm proud, very proud, that my son Matt is, I hope, improving on the family tradition.
All right. Thank you.
You're here.
Mr. Speaker, another hard-hitting question for you, and they won't all be this hard-hitting. You are married to Courtney. You're in a house with 4 lovely ladies, 3 of whom are under the age of 6, right? Okay. Which is harder, getting your way as Speaker of the Florida House or getting your way in that household?
I don't even try at home. I mean, it's my wife runs the show, and I will say, this is the political process is a very it's a tough job on your family. I mean, it's hard for us, and we'll be up till midnight tonight and probably till next Friday trying to negotiate a bunch of different things and working with our members.
I'll be up till 1.
That's 1 in the afternoon, by the way. But our families really are the ones that bear the brunt. Yeah. And my wife definitely gets the way at home, but she earns it because as much as I'm gone, and the travel that's associated with being a presiding officer leading up to it and then doing the job is extremely taxing. And the understanding, the patience that they have to put up with us to do that is pretty amazing. And so, but I will have to say I'm very blessed to have 3 girls, all under the age of 6. But I am expecting my first boy in about 18 weeks. So we're covering all the bases.
It's great. Now to a couple of questions. You know, this is a different kind of night. We talk about policy all the time, and we really wanted to make this dinner kind of more something a little bit different. And I'd like you both to kind of think through this question. Think through when you became Senate President before you actually took office. Same thing with you, Speaker. What did you think it was going to be like? What did it turn out to be like? And what were your expectations versus the reality of actually trying to govern in a state like the state of Florida?
That's a tough question. I think the job, for the most part, has been what I thought it would be. I had the benefit of working for Alan when he was Speaker of the House, and I got a front row seat to what it required. But the truth is there's a difference between taking orders from the guy who's making the decisions and having to make them yourself. And you find out a lot about yourself, I think, in those lonely nights when you're having to make tough calls. I think for me, what I've recognized is that you have a very small thimble of influence that comes and goes very swiftly. You come in, you think, whether you're a legislator or chairman of appropriations or rules or the Speaker of the House or the President of the Senate, there's this presumption by people in the lobbying corps or your constituents that you can just control everything. And what you find out pretty quickly is that you don't control anything. You have a body that has voluntarily elected you to serve as their leader. And the minute you start to think that those people are there to serve you as opposed to you serving them, you've lost not only the respect, but your ability to manage that chamber very quickly. And so what I've learned is, the influence you have doesn't come from anything that's endowed in you. It comes from the people that have put you there. And it comes and goes very quickly. And you should use that thimble of influence for things you actually deep down at your core believe in. And I'm very proud to say that I think I've done that, and I think the Senate President has done that. We've used that very small thimble of influence for things that I think we believe are important for the long-term vitality of our state.
I had the benefit of watching from afar as a business person, as a citizen of Northwest Florida, and watching Speaker Benz operate and watching him serve. And there is no greater compliment that you can be paid in Northwest Florida than to have someone say, "You're an Alan Benz type of person." That's really true. That's really true. So the standard is pretty high. The bar is way up there in Northwest Florida to be a presiding officer. And I was the first Senate President elected from my county since 1949. And so I knew that I had a high bar with Alan Benz. And I guess the thing that I would reflect on, Bob, is not only, as the Speaker said, you have a small bit of influence and you have to use it. You have to use it wisely, but you have to respect people. And that's what people say about Alan Benz. No person in recent history has left the Florida Capitol with a greater reservoir of respect on the part of people on both sides of the aisle. People who argued with him, people who fought with him, people who disagreed with him on issues, or people who followed his lead. No one has a greater reservoir of respect that remains in the Florida Capitol than Alan Benz. And the reason why, and someone said this to me today, Speaker, someone said to me today, it's because Alan Benz let us think for ourselves. He let us come to conclusions. He let us debate. He never feared the discussion and the debate. What I've learned, and frankly what I take with me when I leave the Senate, which will be in 2 years, you're stuck with me for 2 more years, I'll be sitting on the back bench throwing firebombs. Feel sorry for Andy Gardner. He's going to have four former presiding officers sitting in the Florida Senate staring back at him. John Thrasher, who scares the hell out of me all the time, and Gwen Margolis, and Tom Lee, with whom you served, and then me for whatever I would offer. But the one thing that I would take away is it's worth listening to the opposition, not agreeing with them, but listening to them and seeing where you can build some kind of common ground. Speaker Weatherford and I were talking earlier as we drove over about the fact that, and this is my observation, not his, the way that he has operated the House of Representatives, the Democrats and the liberals are uncertain. Yeah. They're a little bit back on their heels. They're not quite sure how they can attack because he's been respectful, he's been thoughtful, but he's been forceful about his principles. I really believe, as we took a budget off the Senate floor with a 38-2 vote, with liberal Democrats voting for a Republican budget, that it's important in this state and in this country, if we're going to build a conservative libertarian base, that we reach out and find out what human issues we can agree upon. There sits John Kirtley. There sits John Kirtley. One of the things that I learned in being a senator was that when I was arguing on the floor of the Senate to expand the Step Up for Children scholarship program, the tax credit scholarship program, that a smart thing to do was to turn to the Democratic leader of the Senate, at the time Al Lawson, and ask him to close on my bill, because Al Lawson knew that school choice was good for African Americans and people who are struggling with poverty. So we need to reach out, and I've tried to learn this from Speaker Benz and Speaker Weatherford and others. We need to reach out to people who have different points of view on some issues than we do and find the common ground on issues that will bring us together, not just so that we can win elections, but so that we can deserve to govern.
Great. Last question, and we'll wrap it up for the night. What do you see for the future of Florida? What do you see in terms of Washington? Well, let's focus on the state of Florida. What do you see for the future of Florida and as it relates to being an example for the rest of the country? And we'll wrap it up with that question.
You first.
Go ahead, Speaker.
I think we're doing a lot of it now. I think a lot of it is just staying the course, making the tough choices. I think this November will be a very pivotal moment in the state of Florida's history. I think we have to recognize that the state of Florida is changing. When you look at the demographics of the state, but I think as conservatives and as people who believe in free enterprise and limited government, our message has to be a little bit stronger and maybe a little bit broader and maybe a little bit more inviting than that, because the truth is not everybody grew up understanding the importance of limited government in their schools. Not everybody grew up with a mom who homeschooled them through the 9th grade, who forced them to read about John Locke, as a child, and to understand the importance of property rights. Not everybody had the benefit of that, which I unfortunately had in 9th grade. But very fortunate, actually. But something I've tried to talk a lot about, and I don't know if it's something our party has embraced, but I think it has to embrace going forward, not just for the state of Florida, but for the country, is fighting for people who can't fight for themselves. And we are in a philosophical war as a country where one side is trying to convince a group of people that they can create enough programs to lift them out of their poverty. And then there's another group, a group that we're all here in together supporting, an organization, JMI, that facilitates and pushes this belief that we can lift people out of generational poverty through freedom and education and upward mobility. And we don't do a good job, we collectively, of fighting for people who are stuck in generational poverty, people who are at the lowest rungs of society. We do a great job talking about the middle class. We do a great job talking about tax cuts. And I believe in all those things, and we should. But I don't think, and it was on my heart as I was going into my last year's session, you start to get a little reflective of, what have you spent your time on, that thimble of influence you have. And I frankly was disappointed that I had not spent enough of my time as Speaker of the House fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Didn't have the ability or the know-how to enter into an upward mobility society that allowed them to get an education and experience freedom and experience success in a way that they never thought they could. Because all they know is they live in a neighborhood where if you live in that zip code, you're pretty much destined for failure. Because your grandparents are poor, your parents are poor, you're poor, and everybody you know in your neighborhood is poor. And that lifestyle doesn't seem very far distant for you for the rest of your life. And if Florida is going to be successful, we can't just pay attention to the unemployment rate, because whether the unemployment rate is 15% or 4%, there is a percentage of society that does not know the difference. Their life is not impacted one way or the other. They're still stuck. And until our party and until we as a people find a way not just to speak to them, but to show them that a government program is not the answer, but that the ideals and the beliefs that we hold true is the answer, and give them the pathway, then I don't think we'll ever be there. But that's a long-term goal that I have, and one that I've tried to keep as my guiding light and my compass as I've gone into my last year as Speaker. And I believe a lot of the things that we're doing this session are moving us in that direction, and I'm really proud of that.
I don't think I have to seize the gift of prophecy to say that in the next 10 years and 20 years and 30 years, you will continue to see not only the name Will Weatherford on ballots, and I hope that's true, but you will continue to see this extraordinary, dynamic man as a leader of Florida and a leader of this country. I don't think I need the gift of prophecy to say that. My name won't be on ballots. My family name might be on a couple of ballots. But I'll just be a guy in the background knocking on doors. So as I consider in a couple of years the sunset of a public service career that's stretched across serving on a school board as a superintendent of schools, although I'm not an educator, just a business guy, and now in the Senate. Here's what I'm concerned about, John, Bob, Mr. Speaker, everybody else who's spoken tonight. I'm concerned that we think that just because we're right, that we're going to win. Just because the facts are on our side, that therefore it's persuasive. And I've lived long enough and seen enough swings of the pendulum to know that that's not true. So the hope that I would leave with you tonight, and what I hope to leave with my colleagues in the Senate when I leave in a couple of years, is the impulse to never give in. To remember that we have to do what the Speaker says and reach out to people who may view us as folks who don't get it, don't understand them, and don't relate to them, and to bring them in not just for the purposes of getting their votes, but for the purposes of giving them hope and giving them a better life by providing opportunities for them in ways that they can bring themselves up. If we think that our ideas by themselves, without extra help, without extra advocacy, without institutions and organizations like JMI, are going to win the day, I remind you that when you pick up the papers, and I used to be a journalist years ago, until I had the operation and went through treatment. When you pick up the papers, when you read the blogs, you know that those who control the megaphones are not on the side of the issues that we care about. So what I hope you would think about for the future of Florida and the future of this country is that, and Barack Obama said this the other day, let me export his words and apply them, I think, in a proper way. We are the people we've been waiting for. The people in this room have the future of Florida in your hands. And people like us around the country have the future of America at their disposal. And if we, in this time, don't seize that opportunity, and if my children and the Speaker's children do not live in a country built on freedom and economic liberty, it will be our fault because we took our success for granted, whether it is in the 2014 elections, whether it is in the debates after church around the coffee pot, whether it is in the discussions that you have at the school board meetings or in the neighborhood coffees. You've got to win the debate, and we've got to push the issues and the points that we care about, because if we don't, if you don't, no one else will. You have the future in your hands. Thank God for the James Madison Institute, and thank you for inviting us here tonight.
Thank you. Let me say one thing.
And we have an announcement to make, by the way. We have an announcement, Speaker and I. We were hoping that Mr. Hilton would be here tonight. And I will just tell you that the first time I actually asked Charlie Hilton for a check, it was a frightening experience. And he gave me an envelope with some checks in it when I was running for the school board. And he handed me the checks, and he said, "And if you turn into a damn communist, I'll come over there and kill you myself." And I still believe he will.
He will.
And then there's the famous letter that he wrote to a Senate president and ended it with this sentence: "All I want from government is less of it." And I wondered if that shouldn't be emblazoned, over the James Madison Institute building.
Yeah.
But Speaker Weatherford and I have been working together on an idea, and we shared it with Speaker Benz and got his permission. And Speaker, if you want to share it.
No, I think you
No, go ahead, boss.
Well, I think us both being huge fans of Charlie Hilton, we've been working together to create a endowed chair at the Florida State University of entrepreneurship and free enterprise in the name of Charlie Hilton. And we think that would be a great way to honor his service to the state of Florida and to free enterprise in our country. So we're happy to do that together in honor of a great man.
All right. Thank you both for taking time. I know this is probably the absolute worst time of the year to be here, but we really appreciate it very much. I want to thank you for being here. I'm going to ask my board chairman to close. Before I do that, you've heard from so many different people. We've heard about our talented board, our talented staff, these great gentlemen here who are helping drive the state of Florida. There's one more person you may not know, and that would be my wife, Julie, of 21 years, who lets me do this job, who's let me do this job for 10 years, and she has put up with a lot, and I just wanted to thank her publicly for all of that. Mr. Speaker?
All right, Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, y'all can leave. I know you need to get back to your... I'm going to raise money, guys. I'm fixing to raise some money, hopefully.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
bud. Thanks. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thanks, Speaker. Thank you. All right, two great leaders. Man, that's... I can't believe all the lies they told about me. That's amazing. But it really is... it's wonderful to have two true believers, and I know they need to, I gave them a pass to head out right now. They've got to go, and I'll be just a couple more minutes. But, years ago, when I was in high school, actually junior high school and high school, my parents died. And I don't tell the story a whole lot, but my grandmother got stuck raising me, and we had no money. I mean, we couldn't pay our power bill, had to talk to the gas company and to give us gas. Life was tough. And one day at school, the guidance counselor said, you are eligible for orphans benefits. I said, really? She said, yeah, you can get like $110 a month or whatever. And that was a lot of money in 1968. That was a lot of money. So I went home, and my grandmother was a sweet lady, and she got stuck having to raise me. But she said, I told her, I said, Nana, I heard about this today. And she quietly sat there and said, I know, I've known about that. So I said, well, let's go do it. We can make some money. And she said, Alan, it's tough, and it's a shame what happened to you. And I know it's real hard for us, and we struggle sometimes, but we're going to make it. And I'm worried that if you begin becoming dependent on receiving money for something you didn't work for, it's not good. And I didn't totally understand it, but, I trusted my grandmother implicitly. So I said, whatever, okay, and moved on to the next thing. I will tell you, that little exercise in life has made me why I'm part of JMI. Because once you become dependent upon government, once you become dependent upon it, once you begin receiving money for doing nothing, that is not good. It's not good for anybody. Not that from time to time, people don't need a helping hand. But anyway, having said that, that's a personal reflection. And tonight I want to tell you that we had some great speakers. JMI is doing great. I think our income this quarter is up 50% from last quarter, first quarter of last year. And we're doing good. We have our new building. It's just about paid for. We have a great board of directors, John, Rob, Glenn, everybody. I know I've missed some anyway, but we have a great board from all over the state. And we're not an in-your-face group. We don't push things real hard in terms of being obnoxious. We just, as they used to say, just the facts is all we present. But I think we do it in a very professional way, in a manner in which we can get our points across. Because as President Gaetz mentioned, when you're up here and all you hear is feedback from the liberal media, you get warped. And I always enjoy the JMI messengers and things like that. They gave me the other side of an issue, the conservative side of an issue, that allowed me to kind of shake my head and say, yeah, I get it. I see the other side. So anyway, any way you can help us with contributions, we would certainly appreciate it. We're always grateful to those of you who wrote checks and write checks. I know tonight we raised a lot of money tonight. And to those of you that bought tables, thank you so much. For those of you that bought tickets, thank you again. We really appreciate it. But it doesn't stop there. And as one of the speakers said earlier, an extra zero never hurts behind those checks. So, Bob, is there any other housework? Thank you all for being here tonight. Have a great night and drive safely.